In the final season of You, Joe and Kate return to New York, making headlines with their fantastical love story straight out of a romance novel, but after 3 years, the breakdown of their marriage leaves them stranded on the floor of a burning bookstore after a fight to the near death. So today, I want to talk about why Kate Lockwood turned on Joe in You Season 5 and what really changed in their 3 years of marriage. When the pipeline project from Kate's past, falsifying reports for her father while she was playing the role of the prodigy, comes back to bite her in the ass, being blackmailed by her business buddy to step down as she came back changed, Kate falls for Joe's fantasy that he can kill Bob to ensure their survival and save their family. She quickly comes crashing back to reality, oh, there goes gravity, when the consequences reveal themselves through Kate's days at work and sleepless nights spent ruminating with remorse, leading to a breakdown with Joe and their marriage that prompts Kate to assume custody of Henry and ask Joe for a divorce. So why did Kate direct Joe to kill Bob if she was going to hate him for it later? Why didn't she let Joe continue to play savior by taking out her sister Regan? And after 3 years of marriage, what really changed? Let's talk about it. While Kate was raised to be ruthless, she ran from that life and her abusive father when she recognized the consequences of her business pursuits causing harm that she traced back to her own actions. She turned herself around, leaving the business world in the US to study art in London. Through season 4, Kate demonstrates herself to be a thoughtful and good-natured person, concerned about the safety of other students after being mugged herself and helping an exploited artist get into rehab. She remains committed to leaving her past behind and being this new person, having no communication with her controlling father and specifically leaving town when he comes to London to avoid any unannounced visits. Until Joe shows up. First, he kills her boyfriend when she doesn't swoon after he saved her from a mugging. I mean, it worked for Beck in the subway. And then he kills her friend from college after she explained to Joe that saving her doesn't mean he gets in her life. So he'll pivot and kill a predator to prove he's worthy like he did for love. Joe manages to penetrate Kate's rightfully erected walls with his persistence, thrusting her into a more vulnerable state at Simon's funeral. He leads her to open up about her true emotional nature that her mother suppressed, forbidding her from showing emotions even when she was grieving her grandparents. So compartmentalized Dark Joe breaks the news of Malcolm's murder to destabilize her world further. As Kate is struggling to navigate her emotions, both Joe and Tom use the murders as an opening back into her life. Joe starts actively following her despite her disinterest and dismissals, insisting that he wants to protect her.
Why are you following me, really? Is it to fuck me?
No.
Which conveniently leads him right into her pants, and then he tags along to Hampstead Estate. At the same time, Tom starts calling, concerned for her safety because of the killings, but his calls go unanswered, so he sends his security to Lady Phoebe's estate against Kate's wishes. It's like she wanted nothing to do with either of them, and they both forced themselves into her life in different, but somehow similar ways. Interesting. When Joe kills Gemma in Kate's room, he positions her to choose. Either she complies in the cover-up with him, implicating her in his crime, which creates a form of control over her as they become entangled, or she alerts security to the murder and her father will blackmail her, despite her innocence, to exert his control over her. Kate knows that her father would use the situation to control her and own her for life, and she's been led to believe through Joe's performance of care and concern that she can trust him. So she closes the door to think and looks up at Joe to see that he's looking at her like she could be the killer, momentarily ruling out the possibility that Joe is the killer, because why would he look at her like she's the killer if he's really the killer? Oh, because he's crazy. So Kate, caught off guard by the murder of her friend and facing Joe, who is seemingly doubting her innocence, she points out that the situation doesn't look good for him either, and he readily comes up with a plan, enlisting Kate's help to relocate Gemma's body. But first, he prompts Kate to truly commit to him.
One thing, if we do this, once we start, we have to see it through.
And very notably, as Joe makes the deal to handle this together and not abandon Kate.
As in, I don't seize the first opportune moment I have to turn around and pin it on you.
And I don't abandon you, either.
He narrates his intention of doing so, only to confirm that she is the real killer so he can, quote, do what needs to be done.
Once I confirm it's really you, I can do what needs to be done.
AKA, kill her. Joe is standing in front of Kate in a moment of fear and vulnerability, telling her that they can deal with this together as it's in the best interest for both of their survival, while carrying the readiness to kill her once he can identify her as bad in some way. Scared by Joe's quick thinking and body disposal, Kate confronts him in the game ladder, now suspecting that he could have killed Gemma as he very much seems to know how to do the things that a killer would do. In the face of Kate's fear, Joe calmly equates Kate's experience of walking in her room to find Gemma's body, knowing her own innocence, as the same thing that happened to him with Malcolm, insisting they're both being framed and deepening Kate's perception of their shared experience. Joe continues to build out his lore, confessing that he had a wife who did bad things and he stuck it out for too long before he finally had to run away and leave his son. He says that all he wants is to start over, and Kate believes that they share the same perspective and emotions towards their pasts and their current desire to walk the right path as somebody new. And she's wrong. As they have this conversation just meters away from the dead body of Joe's latest victim, it's nothing but obvious to the audience that his deepest desire is violence, to such an extent that he will block it out when he wants to do it, but it clashes with his narrative, until it doesn't anymore, but we just go back to keeping it a secret. The second half of season 4 builds on Joe and Kate's connection and her belief in their shared understanding and remorseful feelings about their pasts, as Tom simultaneously tries to regain control of his daughter. Kate gets caught up in the power plays between these two men as Joe convinces her to meet with her abuser so he can gain intel and access to him, assuring Kate that they can safely face Tom together, but not really supporting her in any meaningful way. First, Tom tries to blackmail Joe into killing Reese and then frame him to be caught for it, removing him from Kate's life, in his plan to compel her back home. He furthers his plan by taking a hit out on Adam after Kate mentioned him in conversation during an unannounced visit, and Tom leads Kate back to the airplane hangar to demand that she give up her silly little art life and come back to work for him. When she insists on remaining her own person, Tom destabilizes Kate's entire world and sense of self with the reveal that he's had a hand in everything she's done since she left him. He informs her that he owns her and she will be returning to him, leaving Kate to contend with the control he's had over her and still resolving to run from him, rather than give in to the role that he wants her to play. So Kate calls Joe, confiding in him how she feels instead of leaving without a word, and revealing her father's demand to return that's causing her to run away. Joe tries to stop Tom from being the one to control Kate since he wants to do it himself, so he plans to remove Tom from her life, allowing them to go back home. Joe carries out this plan by killing Tom after Kate mentioned him in a conversation during an emotional confession of the pain that he's inflicted with his invasive control. Joe leads Kate to the hospital after jumping off a bridge to convince her of the guilt that he feels over his purely survival-based killing, and to prompt her to offer him a chance to start over together, moving on entirely from their pasts and never doing any of those bad things again. Believing that Joe really means it in the same way she does, and being in the position to understand Reese's murder as the work of her own manipulative, murderous father forcing Joe to do his business bidding, and in order to frame and disappear Joe out of Kate's life to bring her home, she looks the other way and has the DNA evidence results falsified inconclusive to cover for Joe's involvement. Kate proposes to Joe that they can keep each other good as they return to New York and turn around her father's company, with her stepping in as CEO. Knowing that they're capable of bad things, but they'd both rather die, obviously since he jumped off a bridge he must feel really bad, Kate tells Joe that she will say yes to everything and needs his help to get through the hard times without losing herself, and he agrees to do good and be good and keep her good. And then he checks out of the hospital and secretly kills Eddie and frames Nadia as Reese's murderer to tie up her suspicions and imprison her in silence. Not to cover his own murder of Reese, Kate already handled that in a way where nobody got hurt. Joe frames Nadia into silence, ending their story like the ball's in her court when it's really game over as far as her young life is concerned, sobbing beside her boyfriend's bloody body to demonstrate the sheer brutality of the beast that Joe becomes when he embraces himself while still covering it with his signature narrative spin. Nadia's real life has been effectively ended, sentenced to jail for murders she didn't commit, and silenced from telling her story. This is what Joe does after jumping off of a bridge because he supposedly felt so guilty about committing murder and crimes. He does more murder and crimes, but in secret. So Kate and Joe return to New York, and she prioritizes pursuing ethical projects, ensuring proper working conditions, and progressively pivots the corporation towards more charity work and initiatives, specifically wielding her power for good and the betterment of children's lives. Joe, on the other hand, gets bored and restless. He feels held back as Kate handles all of their problems above board, and he's once again caged in a marriage narrative he didn't think through. Feeling emasculated by Kate's headstrong handling of her business affairs, Joe tries to tackle the release of a hit piece on his own, leaving Kate out of the loop, until finally he fills her in the night that he discovers Buffalo Bob is behind the leak. Feeling betrayed that Joe has been sitting on the secret and looking into it himself, Kate insists that there must be a misunderstanding and says she'll handle it. Joe dismisses this as Kate being unable to admit she needs help and heads to the apartment to draft murder fantasies about Bob. After Kate catches him and struggles with the revelation that killing makes him feel exhilarated, if it's for the right reasons, she is again unsteady as the person she believed her husband to be is revealing himself to be something very different, and facing this in a man she has loved and thought she understood deeply is confusing and disorienting. So when she confronts her Uncle Bob, barely able to lob the accusation given her trust in him these last 3 years, he proudly admits to leaking the story to recast her role as CEO, weaponizing what she did for her father in the past against her now because she turned the company in a new direction instead of taking up the mantle of Tom's toxic reign. That's the stakes here, not just Kate's personal wealth, but the power that she is actively trying to use for good and charity being threatened because she is doing that good, instead of playing back into the prodigy role and proving to be a profitable investment. Bob continues to disclose that he knows she covered up Reese's murder in London and says if she tries to fight him, he'll release that too. And then he laughs in his niece's face as he tells her that she and her son and her husband are fucked, betraying Kate's trust and risking everything she hoped to accomplish for the better because of her complicity in covering for the men in her life. Unsteady by the confrontation and short on time, Kate lets herself fall into the comfort of her husband's narrative that he can kill Bob to protect their family and justify it as necessary for their survival. Kate makes this decision as a means to an end, asking Joe to kill Bob to solve the threat he poses to them, deciding this in an emotional state. Meanwhile, Joe jumps at the chance to commit the violence that he thoroughly enjoys doing, having already been restless and ready when the opportunity arose. Ironic that Bob targeted Kate for her genuine change and refusal to follow in her father's footsteps, forcing a situation that misleads her for a moment before ultimately resulting in his own downfall. After Joe kills Bob and tells Kate they're okay, her comfort is short-lived as the actual news of Bob's death leaves her with horrible nightmares and sleepless nights wondering how things could have been handled differently. Their problems only compound when Regan accuses Kate of having Bob killed, and Joe's immediate response is to suggest killing Regan. Kate rejects the idea, especially off-put by Joe's readiness to resort to it before exploring any other options, and his insistence to continue killing for as long as he needs, clashing with the version of the Joe she has come to know. Kate expresses to Joe that she is deeply affected by the guilt of the violence she enabled when she asked him to kill Bob, and explains that she wanted to do things differently from her parents, but admits that she was repeating their mistakes and asking him to do this, even as Joe tries to deny it. Kate, as Joe's wife and mother to his child, tries desperately to communicate with her husband and understand him as he is not behaving the way that he had been all this time. Joe is ready for the next chapter of his character as a noble knight killing to serve as corporate queen, but Kate is resistant to taking their story in this new direction and pleads with Joe to stand down. She lays out how she's feeling about what they did and why she doesn't want to do it again, and she's confused and concerned by Joe's reaction, or lack thereof, in response to straying from the path that she thought they were both committed to. But Joe gives her nothing. He rejects her reality and tries to substitute his own, insisting that she must want him to kill for her because she covered for his past. But the purpose of covering for his past was to leave it behind, so they could move on and be different and not revisit it going forward. This guy literally jumped off a bridge so that she would believe that he'd rather die than repeat the sins of his past. Then after 3 years of marriage, Joe reveals that he actually doesn't mind killing to protect people if it's for the right reasons, conveniently putting the idea in her head in the middle of a crisis and before a confrontation that leaves Kate feeling personally betrayed by a man she put her trust in. So she takes his hand and asks Joe to kill Bob in what feels like a slightly disillusioned and disoriented state until reality sets in and Kate has time to process what they've done. Because it did happen pretty quick, discovering that her husband wasn't who she believed he was, confessing he wants to kill to protect her, and then finding out that her trusted advisor isn't as trusty as she thought, being the one who leaked her secret to destroy her. Once again, caught between a manipulative man laughing in her face and a manipulative man lying to her face, Kate succumbs to the comfort of just performative protection. Until she wakes up and realizes life isn't a dream or a drama, and the fog of Bob clears, leaving her to see her husband, the murderer who enjoyed it and wants to kill again and again and again, and Kate doesn't know what to do with that. She truly loved Joe and fell for the man he portrayed himself to be, someone who understood her remorse and wanted to change like she did. The whole point is that he manipulates these women into seeing him as a man that he's not, so she doesn't give up on him for some time, believing she can support him through this rough patch and get him back on track. Kate turning on Joe is a slow process of denying Joe permission to kill Regan, sharing how she feels about their slip-up and where she's coming from, and exercising patience to redirect Joe to the bookstore while she tries to handle Regan. Even when Regan threatens her, revealing to Kate that Joe framed Nadia to cover his murder of Race, Kate clings to her love for Joe and Henry in a desperate attempt to overlook it and run off to start over somewhere else, thinking Joe meant what he said about wanting the three of them to be safe. But he didn't, because he reassures Kate to her face in the moment.
All we need is each other. You and me and Henry. Isn't that enough?
Of course.
And then he uses his earlier interaction with Bronte as some twisted justification to run off and kill Kate's sister.
My wife looks at me like I'm a beast, Bronte. You value the side of me that steps up when no one else will.
Despite the way she just explained to him how she hates the part of herself who could even want Regan dead, and despises that Joe won't try to control that same disregard in himself, not realizing that for Joe, the violence is the point. He desires it. Kate tries to understand her husband and the way that he's changed and why he doesn't seem like the man she thought she knew, and Joe keeps not being real with her. Maybe a little real, as he's trapped her in a situation that makes it hard to walk away when his true colors start to come out. But not real, so it takes time for Kate to really see Joe for who he is. And once she does, catching on to his clumsy affair and being read in on his past through Cynthia, it still takes time to navigate the process to safely divorce or even cut him off. Because I don't know if you remember, but he kind of made her complicit in a murder cover-up, committing her to see this through until the end. And then he served her a severely redacted rendition of his history, exploiting her trust in him and his word as she turned a blind eye, handing it all over to Cynthia to handle the headlines. In this time, after Joe has an affair, does another murder that gets caught on a live stream, and signs over custody of Henry to Kate as he gets bailed out of jail, Kate heads to London and leverages her newfound knowledge to overturn Nadia's conviction and offer her the chance to take down Joe. Kate makes the moves to legally take action against Joe and eventually comes to the conclusion that he needs to die because she finally sees who he is under the mask and understands him to be the same as her father or Bob, which through Joe logic means he deserves to die. But Kate isn't like Joe. She has tried every method to take him down, and in this final moment as she thinks she can make the sacrifice of being the one to kill Joe as penance for what she's done, she's wrong and killing Joe isn't the solution. Ironically, if Joe didn't escape the cage thanks to his psycho plan of putting a key in his arm, Kate would have come down and killed him, believing it was the only way to stop him, making her into a killer like he wanted if that was to be his end. So it works out that Joe escapes and disarms Kate, shooting her and getting away only to be trapped just like Beck, and returning to the basement where Kate then attacks him, taking him down and realizing that here, at the very end where Joe thinks there's no other way out, he's finally vulnerable enough to confess to killing Love as Kate secretly records him, exploiting the moment of sincere admission to ensure his guilt is exposed to the world and he's seen for who he really is, the man she rightfully sniffed him out to be. Kate quote-unquote turned on Joe because she believed in the character he portrayed himself to be, a good man who killed people in extenuating circumstances, that feels remorse for these acts to this day and genuinely wants to change. But after 3 years of marriage, she came home to find the mask slipping off, revealing that he's actually a bloodthirsty, violent man who, by his own admission, feels exhilarated by killing and enjoys doing it. She might be momentarily swayed to side with the man she married in a moment of weakness, which leads her pullback to be framed by Joe as a change-up and a rejection of the man that he's always been, but this is misleading. Kate didn't turn on Joe, she just tried to return them to their original commitment. They vowed to keep each other good, and for 3 years, Kate was doing her part. But when it's time for Joe to step up and be the steadying force as Kate faces betrayal by Bob, he instead leads her to simply enable him, asking her to co-sign his killing of Bob, an act in direct contrast to what Joe proclaimed to want from his wife. When Kate comes to him, opening up about her feelings before declaring they are never doing anything like that again, Joe decides he will kill Regan in secret since Kate isn't on board anymore. He just doesn't care how she feels about the matter. He didn't listen to a word she said. As Kate continues trying to communicate about their disconnect and make it clear to Joe that she will handle Regan, Joe is stepping out on their marriage with Bronte and imprisoning both of Kate's sisters before making one of them kill the other. Maybe that's why she turned on Joe. Because he was doing murder and having an affair? Wives can tell when your heart's not in it, Joe. Joe pursued Kate for her story of reinvention, envious of her ability to leave her past behind and become a better person. He threw himself into the character of Professor Moore, which sounds weirdly like Professor Remorse, to play out his own guilt-riddled story of escaping his past to be cleansed, reborn, and once again worthy of love as a clean man who doesn't want to be a killer. And then he got bored with all of the luxuries that life afforded him and decided he did want to be a killer after all, assuming it shouldn't be too much to ask that his wife easily accept that. Oh, but it is, because that's crazy. And you know what crazy people do? Make you crazy. And that's what Joe does for a moment, when Kate gets caught up and asks him to kill Bob. She's being crazy because she's panicked and in proximity to Joe proposing murder in the first place. While it seems like they make this choice together, they aren't on the same page. Joe wants to kill and has for a while, seeking Kate's permission to avoid friction but not requiring it to actually act. While Kate accepts that this must be done in an emotional moment of weakness and wouldn't have otherwise considered this solution without Joe suggesting it. Joe feels exhilarated while killing Bob, and afterward he's ready for the next one, while Kate is only temporarily relieved in Joe's words of reassurance, and then tormented by the reality of remorse and guilt over the enabler that she's become by allowing him to kill Bob. She makes attempts to reconcile and reconnect with her husband, but Joe is unreachable. He betrays her with an affair. She finds out all that he hid from her when she trusted him to tell her about his past, and she learns that he tortured Maddie and killed Regan. So why did Kate turn on Joe? Because he's a violent murderer who convinced her that he wasn't. He catfished her, characterizing himself as a man he wasn't and trapping her in a marriage before letting the mask slip, leading Kate to realize she was right about him from the start.
You are a hollow nobody with no life of his own.
And she needed to stop the monster she married.
Words mean nothing, Joe, because you are nothing.
The real story here is why Joe turned on Kate.
The way Kate's embraced being a mom to Henry, she's a big part of why he's become such a great kid.
Marrying you, bringing you into Henry's life is the worst thing I ever
Words
did.
mean
You're
nothing,
a terrible
Joe, because
partner,
you
a
are
pathetic excuse for a mother.
After co-opting her story of rebirth and walking the right path, he wanted to corrupt her and channel that callous core of Kate cultivated by her father, and then chose to simply write her off when she ultimately resolved to resist his influence. Joe targeted Kate and latched onto her story, hijacking it for himself while simultaneously usurping Tom's position, trying to control her. She was vulnerable to Joe's manipulation as a consequence of her upbringing, and he broke down her walls, not by genuinely forming an authentic connection with her, but by honing in on Kate's emotionality and establishing his character in her eyes to be caring and protective, to then stand in stark contrast to the alternative when Kate is put in a position to choose between the monster she knows and the man she believes Joe to be. He fools her for a time and tries to bring her in on his violence, exposing his abuse in a desire to corrupt her and lead her further from her established morals and sense of self toward his own twisted worldview. But Kate has grappled with being misled before, and feeling the return to reality and remorse in the aftermath of Bob's murder is enough for Kate to recognize that they've made a mistake. She sees that they've strayed from their promise and tries to recommit, but Joe never meant it in the first place. Kate believes she understood Joe, she thought she could read his mind, and they shared a desire to do good and be better. Kate really believed that she loved Joe, but I guess it's hard to call it love when one person is lying the whole time. Huh, Joe? Joe just couldn't help himself. He got a second chance on life after the attacks in London and decided to sabotage it. Joe knocked it out of the park, landing a woman like Kate, but he proved to be too greedy, stupid, and screwed up in the head to live out a happily ever after that most people would dream of. Thankfully, his antics and admissions in the final season seal his fate in such a way that Kate is released from his grasp and truly reborn, changed, and free to live her own happily ever after as the loving mother she never had to her son Henry, ensuring he never ends up like his father or hers.